I saw they had an internship, but it was a normal undergrad internship. And so I reached out and I said, hey, I'm a grad student, but can I still apply for this? And I ended up getting selected, and they gave me more pay, and they essentially created a grad student internship for me. And to me, that is one of these if you don't ask, you don't know type of things.
Welcome to the Data Career Podcast, the podcast that helps aspiring data professionals land their next data job. Here's your host, Avery Smith.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Data Career Podcast. I'm your host, Avery Smith. And in this episode, we have a very special guest. It is Mr. Ken Jee. If you've never checked out Ken before, he has an awesome podcast himself, Ken's Nearest Neighbors. He is a profound YouTuber where he talks about data science stuff. And he recently just started a new podcast called The Exponential Athlete, where he's really diving deep into the stories behind some of the greatest athletes of all time and what makes them as great as they are. How do they think? How are they raised? How do they train? And what insights can we glean and apply into our life? So I'll have the link for all those things in the show notes down below. But in today's episode, we talk about Ken's day job, which he is the director of a sports analytics firm. So he basically manages data science for a bunch of golf and a bunch of USA basketball, USA golf and USA basketball, which is pretty cool. I think that's kind of a dream job for a lot of people. A lot of people I talk to, they want to get into sports analytics. And so when you guys ask me that question, I'm going to send you this podcast and you can hear Ken's thoughts and Ken's stories. Of course, the SPN method is going to be really vital, and you'll hear that in Ken's story. You have to have the skills, you have to have a portfolio, and you have to have a good network. The combination of those three things is really the only way you're going to break into sports analytics. Sports analytics is really interesting because there is high demand. Lots of people love sports and lots of people love data, and so they want to combine the two. I'm one of those people. And there is low demand because if you look at it, there's only like 5 major sports leagues inside the United States. Of course, there's more globally, but still not that many sports leagues and not that many sports teams. So if you just look at like the US, 5 major sports, 30 teams, what is 5 times 30? Public math, right? 5 carry the 3, is that just 150? So there's like 150 teams. And let's just say for easy math, there's 3 data people for each sports organization. Then you're looking at 150, 300, 450 positions. There's a lot more people who want roles than that. Now, there might be more jobs than that. It really just depends. Some, like MLS, doesn't have a whole lot of analytics going on. And some teams in the NBA have like 20 people on their staff. So it really just depends. But my point is there is a low supply, high demand. And when that's the case, prices can kind of go wherever they want. So these jobs often don't pay the best ever, but they're really fun. And some of them pay really well. It really just depends. But the point when there's not that many opportunities and everyone wants it, they can kind of offer a lower salary a lot of the time. So anyways, that's kind of just my 2 cents. I was able to land a sports analytics internship with the Utah Jazz. And I don't remember if I told the story in this podcast or not, but I will tell the full story in a different podcast episode. SPN method is always going to be very true. It's more than just the skills, you guys. You have to have a portfolio and you have to have a network. So this is my weekly reminder, SPN method for the win. If you've never heard of the SPN method, I have a whole free training about it that will talk you through about how to land a data job in 90 days. You can find the link to it in the show notes down below. I also have lots of really fun free resources like Avery GPT, my YouTube channel, all sorts of different things down in the show notes down below. We're also cooking up a bunch of stuff. It's like so close and I want to talk about it right now, but it's not quite ready. But hint, hint, interview simulator, that is coming down the pipeline. We have Job Hunt Shortcut. If you guys haven't checked that out, you guys can check that out in the show notes down below. We have a lot of fun things going on. So if you've never checked out the show notes, today is the day to check them out. I'm excited to get my conversation with Ken. I think you guys will really enjoy it. And if you do, tell a friend. Give this to someone who wants to get into sports analytics, because if it was helpful to you, it will probably be helpful for them. Thank you guys for listening as always, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Data Career Podcast. I'm here with Ken Jee. We are in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you, Posit, for bringing us here. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. Excited.
I'm excited to have you on because I've actually been on Ken's podcast twice, but you kind of caught me
when I took like an 8-month break from my podcast. So that's when you kind of caught me for the latest one. But if you guys haven't checked out Ken's socials, we'll have them in the link or in the description down below. He's got a great YouTube channel, got a great podcast. He has another really great podcast he's been working on that we'll talk about during this episode. But I'm stoked to have you here. And also Ken put this together. So thank you for bringing us together and organizing all of this.
No problem. I'm gonna bring my all for this interview, but got a little burned out. 3 days organizing 30 people, which was amazing and fun, but operationally and logistically a little bit more difficult than I would have imagined. So again, thanks to Posit for making it possible for us.
Yeah, you guys, Ken's like our mom and our dad because he cooks for us. He like tells us our schedule. I think you're like one of the only people I've seen clean up very much stuff too. So
There have been a couple people that really helped. So shout out to Louis, shout out to Jack, shout out to Keith, and then some other people.
Yeah. Let's talk about what you do right now. What's your current job?
So I'm the head of data science at a company called Scouts Consulting Group. So our focus there is helping athletes and teams improve their performance by analyzing the data that's collected on them. So most sports organizations, teams, they either have access to data from a league or they collect data internally. And our focus is helping the organizations or the players to leverage that data into performance, into wins specifically.
Okay, so you're like basically a sports analytics consulting company.
Correct.
Okay. And what do you like? What sport do you guys dabble in the most?
So we focus on golf and in basketball. So we work with pretty much U.S. focused teams. So U.S. golf, which is Ryder Cup, President's Cup, and USA basketball, which is generally World Cup and Olympics.
Okay, so you guys are like, yeah, that's pretty neat. So it's like the Olympics and then the world competitions that you guys are kind of giving insight into, which is pretty super cool. Like the Ryder Cup is one of the most enjoyable, like entertaining, honestly sporting events. I was gonna say just golfing events, but honestly sporting events because it's one of those competitions, USA versus the world, which is always kind of fun. And then international basketball has been pretty entertaining as of late because there's been a lot of parity in the world. Like previously, the US was typically expected to win and often did win most of these tournaments, even with sending, or we'd send like our C team or something like that. But then like I think for the Olympics this year, I don't even know if the US will be favored to win because there's quite a bit of competition.
Yeah, you look at Giannis, you look at Jokic, you look at, I forgot what his name is, Luka Doncic.
Yeah.
International players are dramatically evolving. They're getting better. I forgot what the statistic was, but it's like 50% of the league is international. It's not that high, but there's a large portion of international players that are really good playing at the highest level of basketball now, and it's no longer just a US-centric thing. It's crazy. And people forget a lot that FIBA basketball is very different than NBA basketball in terms of the rule sets, in terms of how you use your hands, in terms of how you can use your body, being close to the rim. So there's a lot of small tangible differences that make it difficult for players who grow up in an NBA system to be able to adapt and adjust. And then if players are playing Euroball, they're used to it. And you start to see that at the highest level in international play be a factor.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I totally, like, I'm familiar, and maybe the audience isn't, in terms of like what type of analytics are in basketball. You can look at like, there's like more clear stats. There's, your shots, your rebounds, your assists. Most of the stadiums have the, what's it called, second spectrum videos, which are basically tracking the players' movements. So, I mean, us, the public, doesn't have access to that, but all the sports teams basically have access to location data.
They actually moved off of Second Spectrum.
Oh.
So Second Spectrum still facilitates. So I forget what the new platform is. They're actually having a lot of issues with it early on, but I think they've been smoothed out. But there's a Second Spectrum layer that the company still exists and does pretty well, but they essentially take the new data and transform it into the older Second Spectrum output, like structured database style. So teams don't have to go through this massive change of the new technology being used.
But it's basically tracking location and the ball location, right? Okay. But I don't know anything about golf. Like, what stats are there in golf?
There's a lot of stats in golf. The most famous and prolific one is called strokes gained. So it was invented by this guy, Mark Brody, who is a researcher at, I think it's Columbia University. And he is generally looked at like the godfather of golf analytics. And the idea is very similar to what wins above replacement is in baseball. The idea is how good is one shot compared to the average shot from that same location. So if you do that, you can compare all of the different types of shots in golf to each other. So you can compare a drive to a putt, to a chip, to a wedge shot, whatever it might be. So, generally if you hit a good drive, it's in the fairway, it's in the middle, you can pick up maybe like a tenth of a shot on the field in that drive, and then it essentially flows down to each shot. And it goes all the way up to each round. So basically, if the average player shoots 70 and you shoot 71, you lose 1 stroke. You minus 1 strokes gain. If you shoot 65 and the average score is 70, you picked up 5 shots. You've gained 5 strokes on the field. And you can break that down to the hole level. So if on the hole, the average score was 4.2 and you made a 4, then you picked up 0.2 strokes on the field. And then eventually it bleeds down to the individual shot levels, where it's a little bit more complicated, but there's essentially a baseline that's created from each range that changes over time. So if you, a putt is the easiest example. So if you have an 8-foot putt and it's essentially a 50% make, and you very rarely 3-putt. You almost never 3-putt in 8-foot,
unless you're me.
Yeah, exactly. But so if you miss it half the time, right, then you'd have a 1.5 expected value on the hole.
Okay.
Right, because you're either going to make 1 or 2, and if you make it half the time, then the expected value is 1.5. So if you make that putt, you pick up half a stroke putting on the field, and if you make the putt, if you miss the putt, then you lose half a stroke to the field. And then you can extrapolate that back further and further to chips and wedge shots and drives based on a baseline similar to that.
Interesting. Okay, but how do they get the data for all of that? Because like in the NBA or like in just basketball, they can put these cameras up and capture a lot of stuff. They have all the stats keepers, watching the game. In golf, do they have like people manually doing this, or like how do they keep track of this data?
So the PGA Tour has a data collection ecosystem called ShotLink. They have, it used to be 30 to 100 volunteers every event that would come and operate essentially lasers that would track every shot that the players hit from every location. They mark where they hit it and how far they are from things. And there's a lot of other details around that. They also have some wind condition data, and they also have data on the individual courses, so you can map the shots to the courses as well. So the PGA Tour manages that, and then I believe that they have handed some of that off to IMG or to some other company to organize how you get access to it, though.
Oh, interesting. That's really fascinating. So they have volunteers looking at it, and then they have like kind of just the course data, like geo files stored somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, the geo files are a little harder to get access to, but they have the tabular shot data and like tabular information on the holes themselves or in the course itself.
So interesting. Okay, so that's like a lot of what your consulting work would be. I mean, that's the most basic stat in golf. Maybe that's not what you guys are doing, but you're essentially looking at golf player data and trying to figure out where they could possibly improve on a given course.
Yeah, so ours is generally a little bit more team focused. So trying to match player performance to the Ryder Cup golf course that they're playing on. So one of the challenges with the Ryder Cup, a little bit with the President's Cup, is the players don't often play on that venue. And so there's not a history of data for them. So we have to figure out, how do you evaluate performance on a course that they haven't necessarily played before.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think the last one was in Italy, was that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so yeah, maybe a lot of American players aren't over there playing in Italy. So you have to try to figure out. And then also pairings are probably important as well. Like, because in the Ryder Cup, don't you go like against each other one at a time or something like that?
So there's 2 different formats. So there's foursomes where you play alternate shot, So one guy hits the drive, the next guy hits the iron shot, and you play one ball. There's also four ball, which both players hit. No, both players play the hole, and you choose the best score, and they play against another pair of two people, and
Whoever wins the hole.
whoever wins the hole with the lowest score, that team goes one up, and you play match play, which means that you essentially, each hole you win, you go one up if you win one hole, you go two up if you win another hole, and then if you lose a hole, you go back to one up, and the goal is to be up more than the number of holes that are left.
See, that's interesting though, because then you have like a resource allocation problem where like it's not like just what team has the lowest, like the best score wins. It's whoever, beat the other team the most, which is not always necessarily the same thing. So that's like, you got to figure out, who do I pair together and who do we verse on the other team to beat them, which sounds hard.
Precisely. Well, you look at volatility different in this than you would on a normal event. So any one hole is dramatically less disastrous than on a normal PGA Tour event where it's stroke play, where if you make a 10 on a hole, that counts on your scorecard.
Yeah.
If you make a 10 on a hole in the Ryder Cup, the worst is that you lose only the hole.
Yeah.
And in some cases, if you make a 10, let's say in best ball,
Yeah.
your partner could make a birdie and you could still win the hole.
Yeah.
So viewing it from a diversification perspective, from a portfolio like approach with best ball,
Yeah.
alternate shot, you have to be a little bit more conservative because you don't have a balancing force. It's just you two playing the same ball. But yeah, there's implications for the structure, the format of the game, as well as the individual players, as well as the course conditions.
Which is probably one of the reasons why, like, you guys can carve a niche and just like, yeah, we do, international golf competitions, because like the game is so different. Because like you said, like if you get a quad, or let's like a quintuple bogey on a hole like in the Masters, you're basically like losing 5 strokes. But you get a quintuple bogey in international, you're like, it's the same as you getting a regular bogey probably, because it's like not as big of a deal. It's just a 1 point difference at the end of the day. So that like allows you guys to like, there's like it's like a whole different math problem that you guys kind of special in.
Yeah, one of my good friends, he does work with a lot of the individual golfers. His name's Corey Jez. I've had him on my other podcast, but he works with the on-course strategy every week with a bunch of players. And he uses analytics, obviously, as a great platform called Tour IQ. But to us, the overhead of creating that infrastructure goes a little bit away from the core of what we do. Frankly, he does it better than we could. So we've created a good business relationship with him so that, if we refer people, those types of things, there's a little bit, I probably should cut that out. But we have a good business relationship with him, and I trust his tools quite a bit.
That's neat. How did you get into this, sports analytics?
So I grew up loving sports. I was a good baseball player in high school. I played golf all that time, but I eventually ended up hurting my shoulder. And for some reason, I could swing a golf club like this, but I couldn't throw overhead like that. So I decided I wanted to play golf in college. I went through and did that. And it's funny, golf and data science analytics, the interest in them or the acceleration of those took off together. So for golf, I was trying to figure out how I could improve, especially when I was playing in college. And one of the ways that I saw was to be analyzing my golf game, to keep track of my data, to figure out largely what type of holes I was struggling on, what type of shots I wasn't performing well with, and to optimize my practice to figure out what area of my game I would get the largest marginal returns on. I don't think people necessarily view practice like that, where they're just like, oh, I'm not that great at this, so I'm just going to grind it out.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily what you're not great at. It's what you could get dramatically better at in comparison. So if I can get 2 shots better at driving really easily, even if I'm still good at that, and putting I could only get 1 shot better for the same amount of effort, it makes more sense for me to invest in my driving because shots are just shots, right? So to me, that was a big eye-opener for me in terms of, okay, I can use numbers to help me with my golf performance. And then after that, I tried to play golf professionally after college. Didn't play that well. Logically, I realized that one, maybe it was outside of my capabilities, which I've come to terms with. The other side of it is that, okay, maybe I could have done this for 5 years and been able to make it to the next level. But I mean, I don't think I could have done it within the first 2-3 years. My game needed a lot of development. My psychology, my mental approach needed a lot of development. And what is the opportunity cost of spending all that time in terms of my career, in terms of looking forward? Yeah, it's interesting on a resume that I had played and it's a good talking point, but I hadn't built a lot of the skills that would be relevant to keep me going forward. And I decided to essentially go back and to pursue building a career and learning more about a lot of these tools. Coincidentally, around the same time, I got interested in DraftKings, in the daily fantasy sports. I interned with them, and I saw some people doing SQL. I saw some people running code, and I was like, "What is this? This is. I don't know what this is. I don't know how to use this. What they're analyzing this stuff with capabilities that I didn't have with the basic stuff I was doing for myself." And so I went back to grad school. I studied master's in global commerce, and my focus was in sort of marketing analytics. So I got to work with SPSS, I got to work with SQL, I got to work with some other tools to start to organize and manipulate data. And then on my own, after I went into management consulting, and I started trying to build models to essentially predict these sporting outcomes or to evaluate team portfolios. And I realized that I still didn't have the prerequisite toolkit to build a lot of the models that I wanted to. I understood how to build, for example, a regression model or something along those lines. But I was like, how do I build this into the specific genre or domain that I'm trying to work in with sports, where there's sort of this closed loop ecosystem in the daily fantasy ecosystem. And so I decided that I needed more technical computer science skills to be able to build these things. I think the math was reasonably solid. I studied economics in undergrad. There was a decent math component there. But after I kind of got going, I just said, okay, let's go back and figure out where I can learn. Yeah, so I realized that there was more that I had to understand to be able to do exactly what I wanted to do. And at the time, I thought getting another master's degree was the most logical place for me to consume that information. Again, this was, 2014, so almost 10 years ago, which is a little different than the domain now, where there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of boot camps, there's a lot of online courses, there's YouTube videos, there's a lot of places, to be able to learn these things, but at the time that just wasn't necessarily available. So this is kind of long, but essentially one of my friends, while I was in that transitionary period getting my master's in computer science, he reached out. I grew up playing golf with him, and he said, hey, I have this great business case study for the Ryder Cup, and being able to help this team, because over the last 11 years to that point in time, or 11 Ryder Cups, the U.S. had lost 9 of the last 11, I believe. It was either 8 or 9 of the last 11, when they were dramatically better on paper or in terms of world ranking. So it's a great case study of why is this happening. And we put some stuff together. I did some light analysis for that, and we pitched that to the PGA of America. We ended up winning that contract, and slowly over time we've brought on more clients, brought on more stuff. I was doing that part-time for a large portion of time. I was doing my degree. I went full-time for a little while. I took an internship at GE in data science. I went back to consulting, and then I went back and I did some more work outside of the company and switched it to part-time, working at a startup, a mid-growth startup in Chicago. And then I eventually, again, came back and have been working full-time at Scouts for, I believe, the last 4-ish years.
And now the U.S. has been winning more.
They have been, but not internationally. So that is something we have to figure out.
So interesting. So with that being said, that was a pretty interesting journey, especially the back and forth stuff. But getting into DraftKings, getting into this scouts consulting group, like at the end of the day, at least the scouts was because you knew someone, it was someone in your network, right? But like for like DraftKings, or like what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into sports analytics?
So it's really interesting with the DraftKings one. I don't think I've told this story in either a long time or ever before. But when I was using the product a ton, I really liked it. I said, okay, why don't I try to get an internship there? It was before my master's in commerce degree. And I saw they had an internship, but it was a normal undergrad internship. And so I reached out and I said, hey, I'm a grad student, but can I still apply for this? And I ended up getting selected, and they gave me more pay. And they essentially created a grad student internship for me. And to me, that is one of these if you don't ask, you don't know type of things, where I was overqualified for the one, but they essentially made a role for me. I very clearly described that how I use the product, how I appreciate what they do, and a lot of those types of things. And because I had that story piece, they were able to build something that essentially gave me a job for the summer and gave me more money than the other undergrad intern that they brought on. So that to me is a lesson in not necessarily resourcefulness, but curiosity in terms of just asking what's available, because we all know that there's internal postings. We all know that there's asymmetric information where maybe they posted things on one job platform, but they forgot to post it on LinkedIn or whatever it might be. There's this idea that, oh, I didn't get this job that I really wanted and I applied for it directly. But if you have a contact with a hiring manager, you can be like, oh, are there any other roles you think I might be a good fit for, or anything along those lines. So we look at this job search very linearly, that, oh, I have these three options and I have to go through this door. But there's probably hidden doors that if you just ask about, they almost definitely exist.
So neat, because yeah, you're 100% right that what's the Wayne Gretzky quote? You missed
100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, and so you just went for it. And I think also you had like a good background for it. You had played, sports at a high level, and you were using their product. So that probably set you apart, where it was like, there's a lot of people that have the same skills as Ken, but maybe not like the same, domain experience in sports, and then also the passion for the product. And that probably set you apart.
Well, think about any company. Why wouldn't they want to hire someone that is a power user of their product? I use Amazon a ton. I use a bunch of the different features. I understand some of the pitfalls, or how I would think about the product maybe differently than they do. If you're a data scientist and you use Amazon a lot and you want to work there, thinking about, oh, how does their recommendation algorithm work? How would you improve that? What are some things that you're observing? That can go a really long way in a conversation with someone that really cares about the company. I think Jeff Bezos is in the camp where you want missionaries, not mercenaries. And I've heard that from the Founders podcast, is that you want people that are unbelievably passionate and they're advocates of your product, not just people that you're paying a lot of money to work on it begrudgingly. And if you view it that way, and most companies generally would prefer that, you can show that you're a missionary by talking about the product and how much you like it, or how you've used it, or some of the things that you've observed that could potentially be improved about it.
Yeah, that's the difference between like just spraying and praying your resume all over the place where you don't really care about it, versus like either like having like a cover letter or some sort of a cold message, or maybe it's just in your first interview, actually explaining, hey, this isn't just one of 1,000 jobs I applied for. Like, I'm actually really interested in this because, A, B, and C, I've thought about this. Here's an example of maybe how I would approach it if I was in this situation. Sets you apart.
Yeah, I remember I applied when I was first in the field. I applied to a position that I was definitely not qualified for. And it was at one of the big ski mountains for essentially leading their data science team in operations. And I wrote the corniest cover letter, but it was about how when I was a kid, I grew up skiing the mountain. I had these incredible memories of how essentially that played into my development. And some of it was kind of bullshit, but it was a fun story to write regardless. And they at least gave me a call back. They gave me an interview, which I don't think I would have gotten without writing that cover letter. I looked at it as just a fun exercise to be able to get, like, can I sell myself to this organization? And there's different varying views on cover letters. Is that, hey, nobody's using them, hey, whatever it is. But I viewed that as a differentiator. If I'm a good writer, one, I can show that, but two, if I can clearly communicate what the role or the company means to me, that's more face time or more time that they're spending thinking about me than other candidates if it's really compelling and interesting. So to me, there's all these, it's a culmination of a lot of little things that you do in the job search that are different than other people, that separate you and can push you forward. So, the DraftKings thing, not a lot of people were sending in emails about the internship and asking about it, ask clarifying question, asking if it was a good fit. That clearly made me stand out because I was different from the other candidates. And they just gave it more consideration. You look at, they say the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. I something along those lines in terms of idiom, but that can be a good thing in terms of the job market as well, is that if you're thinking and choosing between 100, 200 people, you're going to have the big data bowl. You have some of these other places where you can use real sports data and create real insight. And I believe those are the best places to showcase that you have a skill set and you can already create value for teams. To me, that is something that is generally a first go-to. There's other sides of sports you can get into in terms of the front office, or in terms of the league ops or the stadium ops. But if you want to work in performance, you should probably be able to showcase how your analytics or your model building can contribute to team improvement in some way.
When you first said it's about what you've done in the past, I got kind of worried because I was like, well, then all these people that want to get into sports analytics, it's hopeless because it's like they don't have sports analytics or maybe even sports in their background. But what you're saying is, like, you can go out there and create your own experience by doing like the Big Data Bowl, which is basically like an NFL hackathon that they do every year or something like that. Like, you can create your own project and just have at least something to showcase your skills.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's something to showcase. It's something to offer the teams, right? So sports is very competitive. I think it's a little bit different even than a normal organization, in the sense that all sports teams, they want to proprietize their research. They don't want other teams to have it because, well, this could be true for business, but they're not as explicit about it, but because it's their competitive advantage. So let's say you make something that can help one of these teams allocate their roster more effectively or organize playing time more effectively. A team will hire you, but they're also getting the research that you've done, and they can probably integrate that relatively shortly into their ecosystem. And that also takes it off the market from competition. So if you have something that they can start using immediately, you've built a product or something that can help a team in a way, or they see how that solves a problem for them, you can very explicitly jump into a role because they're looking for that problem to be solved. I think that that's harder to understand in larger companies, but in sports, it's pretty concrete. All of them have the same objectives. The goal is to win more basketball games and then win the playoffs and win a championship every year, or to maybe in the next 10 years win a championship. What can you do to help them do that? I mean, they have, again, like operational allocational issues. They have strategy issues in terms of essentially like how you run plays. They have player individual issues, how they should be utilized or whatever it might be. And if you're building something that can help solve any of the problems I've just mentioned, why wouldn't they hire you?
Yeah, if you do a good enough job kind of convincing them. Like you said, you have to have the product or just like the project that you've done. Then you also have to take the step, almost the social step of you kind of mentioned with the cover letter, of like actually sending it to them or presenting it to them or getting their attention, which is difficult.
So one of the heads of analytics and one of the teams that we've worked with He was reading emails from high school kids that they were sending him.
Really?
That he said, oh, what do you think of this analysis? Or do you think this kid in the next 4 years might be able to contribute something? I like the idea of what he did now, right? These analytics organizations, these teams, generally they're understaffed because the skill set is hard to find, but they're always interested in more information. They're always interested in trying to understand how to evolve the game and improve their performance, right? But the problem is figuring out how to hire for these roles, find the right people, and the channels are just a little bit different than you would traditionally think. Still, they're early in the game compared to large business, unless you're at one of the like top analytics organizations like Philadelphia, or you're looking at the Astros or some of these places. That's how greatness in sports is, in my opinion, is that if you see something that could be useful, it doesn't matter who it came from. The goal is to win. You just try to optimize for that. All information is good. I mean, how long does it take to read an email or see an analysis? Maybe 5 minutes. If 5 minutes means winning another game over the course of a season, I think every single player, coach, anyone would take that, right?
And you bring up a good point that it's like, so let's say someone cold messages or cold emails like a head of analytics. They're probably going to read the email, even no matter what the email is. You usually read first emails, and then you decide how to act based off what's in the email. If you back that first email with value, you're probably going to get more time and more opportunity. But if you're like, hey, like, can I show you this analysis, or can I ask you a question? You might not get a reply. But if you're like, here's something that I did, do you find it interesting or not? That could be really impactful.
Yeah, the best way, in my opinion, is to create something that's interactive, a Streamlit, a Shiny for Python, or something along those on dashboard, and make it so that it's easy for them to use. You can send that in an email, and you don't have to. I would never ask questions in emails. I'd say, hey, this is what I mean before you show them what you can do. To me, if I just get an email that has a question in it or a couple questions in it that don't have very direct, concrete answers, or that I've answered on the internet before, I will not respond to it. Right? It's, oh, how do you break into data science? I have 7 videos on that. This is laziness on your end, because you also didn't give me much of context. If someone sent me an interview that said, hey, I watched your video on this, I was a little bit confused by this point, and my unique situation is this and this that makes this a little bit more difficult. What do you think about that? Then I might be inclined to answer that, because they've clearly done their homework, they've thought about it, they're not just being lazy and asking me to solve a problem for them that I clearly can't, because all of this, there's nuance in it, and everyone has an individual story. So if you're viewing that in the lens of a email to a director of analytics or to someone who's at an organization you're interested in, it goes, okay, hey, I've been really interested in XYZ organization for a long time. I thought this analysis might be really helpful to you. It is based on XYZ research that I've done, and I think it solves this problem. And then, if this is interesting to you, like, please let me know. I'd love to do more. I'm also in the market for a job. Is there anything available? Or if something does come available, please let me know. That's what people don't realize, is a lot of the time jobs are related just to timing, right? You might be a great candidate, but we've seen how, for example, Meta and a bunch of these places, they laid off a bunch of people even though they're highly profitable, right? And that's because, at least according to Zuck, that they overhired during COVID. They're also transitioning what their business is, right? They're going from, they were really leaning into AI. I guess now they're going back into augmented reality. But those ebbs and flows in a business dictate what the demand for specific skill sets are. And so if you think about maybe a coaching change in a NBA team, or a management team, or a leadership change, they're probably going to either want more analytics people or want less. And so that is something that you can observe or coincide these things with. And if you're already on a list, a short list of people to be called back in, if there's roles that open up, that really helps you out when those changes come. But it's obviously important to have a job now. But over a career, I think it's more important to have opportunities that come to you, and you do that by getting on that short list of someone else, by saying, if there's something in the future, let me know.
I love that. And that's an easy thing if you get rejected. Be like, yeah, what other job would I be a good fit for? Or just, can you keep me in mind? Which a lot of the times you'd think that wouldn't be the case. But I was rejected from ExxonMobil, and they said, we'll keep you in mind. And I said, sure. And then I got my job at ExxonMobil 6 months later. When I applied to be a data sports analytics guy at the Jazz, they said, no, sorry. And then I got an email, like, I don't, maybe a year later, hey, we have an opening. Are you interested? Like, that stuff actually happens, which is crazy to think about. But let's talk about your new project, because you've been living in the sports analytics world. You've been making a lot of data content, Ken's Nearest Neighbors, YouTube channel, all that good stuff. And now you're creating a new podcast. It's called The Exponential Athlete. That's more focused on like athlete greatness mindsets. That's kind of how I describe it. But how would you describe it?
I'd view it as a sports or just an overall performance podcast. So I take a ton of inspiration from the Founders podcast, from the Acquired podcast, the How to Take Over the World podcast. I essentially study the greatest athletes of all time. I read 5 to 10 books. I listen to all the podcasts I can on an individual athlete. I create a framework for what I believe made them successful in their sport or their domain. And these are all things that I think we can learn and apply, whether it's to a particular sport or to our life and performance in another domain. I think the goal for this is to figure out what I believe to be the biggest outliers of humans do. I think sports, even more so than like entrepreneurship or these other domains, they have to have a fundamentally different mindset because they're going into like a competitive sphere every day. And so I wanted to, one, learn about this because it's interesting to me. It goes from my own perceived deficiency in golf and not making it. What was I missing when I was pursuing that? What is what are you missing to take it to the next level? In a podcast or in your work, I would imagine these things are hidden in the framework that makes up these great athletes and these really impressive people. There's also things we can learn on the other side of that. When does it go too far? When does ego get in the way? When do our bodies break down? And if we're in the frame of professional sports. So the way, again, it works is I do that case study. So we do usually 3 to 4 episodes on an individual athlete where it's me doing the analysis and talking about it. And it's not sports analytics. There is some analytical components, though, occasionally. And then I interview people to go into deep dives into the specific tools that I find within the athlete's repertoire. So, for example, the first series is on Kobe Bryant. And something really unique about Kobe Bryant is that he created this alter ego, the Black Mamba. And the Black Mamba came at an important part in his life where essentially he was really struggling with the fan perception off the court. And he needed to figure out how he could still continue to play well in spite of being booed and having essentially public perception turned on him. So he created this alter ego, the Black Mamba, so that he is on the basketball court is essentially turning into a different person and is disassociating from the negative aspect that is being brought by the fans. And this comes from, this is based in science. There's something called the Batman effect, where kids were given a difficult challenge and they were asked to solve it, and then they were observed. So the control group, they don't have any prompt. In the action group, they're told to either take on the role of Batman or Dora the Explorer. And you saw when the kids took on the role of Batman or Dora the Explorer, they talked to themselves differently. They said, Batman wouldn't give up, or Dora the Explorer would find curiosity in this order. And the kids are not saying that specific thing, but it's the idea there. And to that point, the kids that took on the role of Batman or Dora the Explorer, they stuck with the problem longer and they were more effective at solving the problem. So there are real constructs that we can use, whether using our imagination or looking and framing things differently, that can directly impact our performance and how we perceive these different situations. So that is just one example. There's plenty of other ones related to, for example, how these athletes learn, what motivates them, which I think is really interesting. What would motivate someone to grind for 20 years of their life doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of these different aspects that I would hope are as helpful to anyone. I mean, generally the podcast is targeted at professional athletes, coaches, or people that are very specifically trying to reach the pinnacle of their field, because it is dense, it is heavily researched, and to be honest, I don't think that people that are just sort of lukewarm about their performance or their success in their domain would really find it as appealing.
I think that's so interesting because if you think about it, like what you're really talking about is like what mindset do people have? And at the end of the day, as a job seeker, as even like as an entrepreneur, as a podcast host, like your mindset dictates probably way more than your actual skills do in almost any part of your life. The way you actually think about yourself and how you envision yourself. Like, do you see yourself as just a normal person, or do you see yourself as Batman or Dora the Explorer? Like, that has such a big impact. And so I think if we study that, you probably would see performance go up. That's the goal, right?
Yeah. So, fortunately, in the first season, I was able to get the person who wrote the Alter Ego Effect book, but he also was the person that worked directly with Kobe Bryant to create that Black Mamba alter ego. So we go really deep into that. It does go beyond that. So in sports, there's also a physical training perspective. There is a nutritional aspect. There is a skill acquisition aspect of learning new movement patterns and things along those lines. And I dive into those as well. Maybe not as relevant for like this general audience, but to me, those are all things that are important to anyone. Is that, okay, if I'm learning statistics, if I'm learning to code, any of these types of things, how do I go deep and actually practice those as effectively as possible? There is a right and generally a wrong way to practice. Or no, I shouldn't say that. There is an efficient and effective and a less effective way to practice. And as you'd imagine, a lot of the greatest athletes of all time, they practice in a slightly better way. I mean, some inside baseball on that is the gamification, variety, these types of things are very important in skill acquisition and retaining them over time.
Sweet. Well, I'm stoked to be listening to that. I've listened to the Kobe Bryant series. Tiger just came out, I think, recently.
The first episode of the Tiger series, yep.
Okay, so there's some good stuff out there. We'll have the link in the show notes down below for you guys to check it out. But The Exponential Athlete, you guys got to check it out. Ken, thanks so much for being on the pod.
Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it. You guys can find Ken on YouTube. You can find all the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast, as well as The Exponential Athlete, wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll have the links in the description down below.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm back. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. If you did, what are you doing now? You might want to listen to another episode. You might want to watch a YouTube episode. You might want to leave a review for this podcast. You might want to tell a friend. There's so many different options that you can do right now. You might want to check out the show notes and see what's going on in the show notes. So many different options. I can't even contain my joy. So I'm excited to know which one you guys pick. See you in whatever thing you click next.